It's the 30th. Today, the Supreme Court handed down another major decision. Now, I originally thought the result about birthright citizenship could come out at any moment, and today the decision was announced. So, what's going on? Also, yesterday, the Supreme Court made a significant ruling. Mail-in ballots can be counted after Election Day. What does that mean? It makes the Save America Act a battle the Republicans absolutely have to win now. All right, and then there's also two factions of the Communist Party are attacking America at the same time. So how will Trump fight on both fronts? And finally, something I think is really worth watching, the Russia-Ukraine war has taken a turn, and now Putin's position is looking shaky. All right, welcome to Good Morning America, brought to you by Fang Wei. Hello to our YouTube viewers, and I hope our listeners on Silicon Valley FM 96.1 are doing well. Yesterday's news was pretty short because some Supreme Court decisions hadn't been announced yet, so we're squeezing them into today. Today's news will be a bit longer. But these are all very important topics. All right, let's get straight to the point. Yesterday, the Supreme Court ruled that as long as the ballot is postmarked on Election Day, it counts. So what does that mean? It means as long as the postmark is stamped on Election Day itself, the ballot is valid. The election results don't have to come out on the same day because counting ballots can continue for several days after the constitutionally designated Election Day. This is a very significant ruling. The source of this case is that the Republican National Committee filed a lawsuit in Louisiana to put a stop to the practice of, after Election Day ends, checking how many votes are still needed and then committing fraud to make up the difference. Then, ballots with postmarks from Election Day keep coming in, being added in to change the outcome. 2020 was one example of this, and the 2026 California election is another real-life example. June 2nd, yes, June 2nd, was California's primary election. Now it's June 30th, and there still isn't a final result. The votes still haven't all been counted. What's going on here? If the Louisiana case becomes a Supreme Court precedent, it could change the way things are done in 30 states, including California, where ballots are counted slowly after Election Day. This would put an end to California's ridiculous vote counting process and the potential risk of ballot tampering. That's why the Republican National Committee took the Louisiana case to federal court and eventually appealed it to the Supreme Court. That's the intention. A couple of months ago, during the Supreme Court hearing, it seemed like the court was leaning toward a Republican victory. But as we all know, and as I mentioned to everyone, the decision was expected to come out the Thursday before last, but it didn't. So the ruling has been delayed by almost 10 days compared to what was expected. Well, obviously something changed. There was a lot of internal controversy. It got dragged out into the last 2 days because at the beginning of July, the Supreme Court goes on vacation and everyone heads home. They don't come back until September, so pushing it through in those last 2 days really shows that the controversy lasted right up to the final moment. In the end, the vote was extremely close, just a one-vote difference, 5-4. The key dissenting vote, the one that led to the Republicans losing, was cast by Barrett. And it was Barrett who wrote the opinion for this decision, which clearly shows that he personally advocated for this extension. The votes could be counted. Even after Election Day, that was his position. So if you ask what his stance was, Barrett said, "My position is textualism." What does textualism mean? It means that the Constitution says Election Day, so that's the day voters cast their ballots. The new opposition didn't specify how the votes should be counted, so I ruled according to this. But another justice, Alito, said that the Constitution's Election Day means the day the election is completed. If you rule this way, you're essentially denying the rights of all voters. This is the meaningful definition of Election Day. When Election Day turns into Election Week or Election Month, how can that still be considered constitutional? So, can you all hear it? Sorry about that. It's the same thing, just different interpretations of the term Election Day. Of course, this is called interpreting the Constitution, right? The Supreme Court's job is indeed to interpret the Constitution, so Barrett is clearly approaching this from the perspective of the individual voter. The election system is about voters casting their ballots. As for when the votes are counted, that's not important. We can talk about that later. The Constitution doesn't specify that. But Justice Alito said that you have to look at it from the perspective of the entire election system. Since Election Day is set for that day, the election should be completed on that day. So on the surface, both sides have their own reasoning. It all depends on how you interpret it, how you rule. How will the 9 justices ultimately decide? But after Barrett cast her vote, if you add Chief Justice Roberts, who was also appointed by a Republican president, the two of them ended up on this side. Among the three liberal justices, after this shift, it became a 5-4 decision, and that's how the ruling came down. So why did Barrett rule this way? Well, based on what I know about her, let me offer my interpretation. Let's call it Feng Wei's interpretation. So this kind of ruling is basically about making things easier for voters. As long as you cast your vote on election day, that's enough. As for convenience, the flip side of convenience is often loopholes. We all know that any system that gets attacked, whether it's a software system, a hardware system, or a physical system, when it's easy to get in, it usually means there are bigger loopholes. In other words, a stricter system often just endures it. Convenience, right? Like, we're all familiar with this. When you log into some software or a website, if you want it to be convenient when it asks for a password, you might just pick something like 12345. But if they don't allow you to do that and instead require numbers, special characters, letters, and so on, at least 9 digits, maybe even 12, things like that, then it's not so easy anymore. And then if you add two-factor authentication with your phone, of course it becomes really inconvenient. But what you get in return is the security of your password and the safety of the website or software. So now we have to ask ourselves, what is the real issue facing this country? Is it really that voting isn't convenient enough for voters? Or is it that elections in the United States aren't secure enough? So let's all vote, shall we? If you were a Supreme Court justice, how would you rule? What do you think an election really means? Is Election Day the day when voters cast their ballots, and that's what makes it Election Day? Or is Election Day the day when the United States finishes the entire election process, and that's what we call Election Day? All right, let's do a poll, okay? And then Stephen Miller, a senior advisor to Trump at the White House, openly blasted the Supreme Court. He said that Roberts and Barrett went over there to vote, and that this is just common sense. Election Day is the day a country completes its election. There can't possibly be any other interpretation, and there can't possibly be a second conclusion. So if you rule this way, according to your judgment, you'll end up creating something unique to America, state election days, or even multiple election days. Then he went on to say, this ruling shows that the Election Reform Act, the Save America Act, absolutely must be passed. Besides requiring ID cards and citizenship verification, there must not be universal mail-in ballots. Except for special reasons, like if you're stationed overseas, traveling abroad, or have a disability that prevents you from voting in person, only a very small number of people should be allowed to vote by mail. There shouldn't be large-scale universal mail-in voting for everyone. Of course, this ruling doesn't have much impact on the election itself, since it only affects a very small number of people, right? Now, let's talk about the heated debate over the rescue bill following the Supreme Court's decision. We're talking about yesterday's ruling here. Because yesterday, I have to apologize. I told everyone I would talk about the Supreme Court's decision, but then I ended up missing it and forgot. So today we'll just continue talking about it, okay? All right, as I mentioned earlier, the Supreme Court ruled on Election Day. Whether or not it can be postponed since the decision has already been made, this ruling means Trump posted a tweet saying that this means Congress has no choice but to pass the Save America Act, that it absolutely must pass. He posted a long tweet basically making 3 points. First, you have to show your ID to vote. Second, you need to show proof of citizenship. Third, mail-in ballots are not allowed except for special circumstances. President Trump then went on to say that no politician or anyone else has any reason to oppose these 3 requirements. There's only one reason to oppose them, and that reason is cheating. Then Trump continued. He said that the House of Representatives has already passed this crucial bill 3 times, but the Senate seems unable to get it done. Trump went on to say that our country is experiencing a powerful communist movement, and this movement is even more dangerous than World War I, World War II, Pearl Harbor, or 9/11. All these Democrats, as well as our 5 Republican senators, are blocking it. This includes, what's her name from Alaska? Murkowski and Susan Collins from Maine. There's also Tom Tillis from North Dakota, and then there's Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, and Mitch McConnell from Kentucky. He said, you must vote to save our country. There can't be any excuses. After everyone posted, you find it pretty interesting. Yesterday, Bill Cassidy immediately came out and tweeted, saying, which assistant told you that? I actually supported the final version to save the American courts. What he meant was, don't blame me, I was supportive. So now you're left with just 4 people. Murkowski, Susan Collins, and then there's Tom Tillis. Sorry. And then there's McConnell, so you're just 1 person short. To put it plainly, because the Republicans have 53 votes to 47, if you have that, then you're just one person away. That's all. So the question is, why can't Schumer do his job well and persuade them to change their minds? So right now, most Republicans are honestly pretty frustrated with Schumer. But even so, up to today, Trump hasn't said a single harsh word, because changing generals right before a battle is a big taboo in warfare. If you replace your general and that causes Schumer to turn against you, that's basically losing another vote, and you're already short on votes as it is. If you push Schumer to the other side, then it's going to be even harder to pass anything. But the grassroots movement leader, Scott Presley, wasn't so polite. He actually went straight to Schumer's hometown recently, to the South Dakota Republican State Convention. When he tried to go in, Thune ordered security to stop him, so the guards wouldn't let him into the venue. As a result, he immediately started live streaming with his phone. In the end, it escalated to the point where the chairman of the South Dakota Republican Party had to apologize and the guard was fired. At the same time, a committee at the South Dakota Republican State Convention passed a majority resolution to censure Thune. Ultimately, the convention didn't pass it. If it had, his own state party would have been censuring him. Since only a committee censured him, Thune dodged a bullet. As for Presley, a grassroots activist making daily statements, comments if you know who he is, he's just an ordinary citizen leading a movement. So during the 2024 election, he spent a long time in Pennsylvania and really helped bring out a lot of votes there. That's why, within the Republican Party, many people believe that the victory in Pennsylvania is closely tied to Presley. And of course, there's also Musk, who is throwing money around and doing things at the grassroots level. So when he spoke publicly, what were his main points? There were three main points. First, he said, "We have the president, the Senate, and the House. How could we not get things done?" That's the first, a strong question. Second, this so-called Save America Act has such high voter support, up to 80%. How could it still not pass? Third, Speaker Johnson in the House only has a 2-vote margin, 215 to 213, and with over 400 in the House, Mike Johnson still passed the Save America Act 3 times and many other bills. In the Senate, there are 100 people, and you have 3 extra votes, so why couldn't you pass it? So what's the difference between you as a leader and the leader of the House? That's why making sure this gets passed is your job. What he means is, don't act like it's none of your business, like, oh, they're just not voting, what can I do? So Presley said, how come Johnson is able to persuade everyone? Why can't you persuade them? So some viewers have also asked me about 2N's attitude on this. To be honest with you, even now I still can't figure it out. I really can't. The only thing I picked up on is that someone advised him to get rid of the filibuster, to not let the filibuster get in the way, because there's no way the Republicans can get 60 votes. He spoke his mind and said, if someone wants to steal a car, it's like I'm the one giving them the keys. What does that mean? He thinks that getting rid of the filibuster is a political mistake, so insisting on getting rid of the filibuster is like stealing a car. When the Democrats come to power, they'll get rid of the filibuster, but I don't want to do that. In other words, if the Democrats want to steal the car, don't say I gave him the keys. I'm not giving the keys to this car. So if you want to do something bad, that's on you. I'm not involved. That's basically what he means. So what I take from this is that John Thune wants to keep his hands clean, just like that. All right, just like that congressman from Kentucky, emergency, I have the same comment. If all you want is to keep yourself clean, then you shouldn't be serving in Congress, because that's a job where you're supposed to help the whole world, right? As Confucius said in China, when poor, one should keep oneself virtuous. When prosperous, one should help the world. If all you want is to keep yourself virtuous, then why go serve in Congress? Why even try to become a party leader then? Also, let's talk about this. He just doesn't want to abolish the filibuster. Even if that's understandable, you can still enforce the filibuster, right? Make the other side actually get up and talk until they're exhausted. Why not do that? Because according to Toomey's reasoning, he says we can't do that, because if we do, then we won't be able to get anything else done. So what happened? He just gave the Senate a 2-week break. The Senate is on vacation and went home. And from what I've heard, in August, the Senate isn't coming back either. So this just doesn't make sense. He says we're too busy, we can't do a filibuster, we'd have to use all the Senate's time for the filibuster. But now, when there's clearly time, he's letting everyone go home for vacation. So I really can't figure out what his motivation is, you know? As for keeping a clean image, like I mentioned earlier, maybe it's also about being lazy because he doesn't want to deal with the pressure. If you want to do what's called a talking filibuster, you have to stick it out to the end. You have to keep all 50 people present at all times because at any moment, the other side might give up the filibuster and then the voting would start. If your 50 people aren't there and the other side has, say, 47 votes present, you might not be able to win. So keeping all 50 people on site is extremely difficult. So maybe he just doesn't want to do it and is slacking off? Could that be possible? But the problem is, by doing this, you're actually putting yourself under a ton of pressure now. Now, the entire Republican Party's focus is going to put more and more pressure on you at the Supreme Court. After this ruling, Trump will have no way out. His only option left will be the Save America Act. So all the pressure from the party will fall on the leader. So if he really doesn't let it pass, by 2028, forget about being Senate leader, he probably won't even be able to stay a senator. Because if Trump tells South Dakota to remove him, then he'll have to step down. Trump's influence is just too strong. So just to avoid this pressure, he's risking his entire political career. But to take on the pressure from the entire party and become the main target of the Republican Party, that doesn't make sense either. So it's just really strange. Of course, some people online are saying, well, he must have been bought off by the Democrats. I don't think that makes sense either, because he's already the Republican Senate leader. What leverage do the Democrats have to buy him off? Why would he even need to be bought off? Okay, because if the Democrats really did buy him off, once that kind of thing gets exposed, the Republican Party in South Dakota, because South Dakota is absolutely 100% Republican territory, would never elect him again. So basically, siding with the Democrats would mean giving up his high position, because the Democrats aren't going to hand him a Senate seat. So it really doesn't make sense either. The real reason is pretty baffling, honestly. Does anyone here have any guesses as to what's really going on? Especially, do we have any viewers from South Dakota here? So feel free to share your thoughts on what the reason might be, but let's not insult anyone. I suggest we keep it civil. This is a public forum, right? Let's analyze it together. You're broke after all. Despite my respect for America and its politics, I can't figure out why they're blocking this. Why not push the case harder? If he pushed and others refused, he could say, see, they did it. But now he's not even trying. It's weird because if he continues, he'll become everyone's target. Even if Trump stays quiet, others won't. It's just strange. Now, Speaker Johnson is stepping in, proposing to add the Save America Act to the National Defense Authorization Act. His logic is that the NDAA, so it's something that absolutely has to pass. So he's tying it in, thinking that way it can all pass together. Of course, this is really just, how should I put it, a political gesture, just a show of determination, because the Democrats will absolutely never let it pass, right? They'll definitely drag it out. And anyway, dragging it out just messes with Trump's administration, drags down Trump's Department of Defense or his War Department. They don't feel any pressure about it. So even if you tie it in, they'll still filibuster you, and there's nothing you can do about it. So it's really just a gesture from the House of Representatives. So this Save America Act, right now, since there are only 3.5 months left until the midterm elections, not much time at all, just 3.5 months, right? Now it's July to July, August, September, October. That's 4 months and 5 days left. There's really not much time. If they keep dragging it out, in the end, it'll be a done deal and there won't be any time left. So right now, within the Republican Party, everything surrounding the filibuster in the Senate, all the different aspects of this issue are going to get extremely intense. Let's just wait and see what happens next, okay? Now, the next piece of news is actually another major headline. What's going on with 2 communist parties attacking America at the same time? First, let's talk about this. Today is Election Day. Today, several states are holding primaries. Well, actually just one state, and that's Colorado. In Colorado's 1st Congressional District, the current representative is a senior congresswoman named Diana DeGette. She's been serving as a congresswoman for 30 years, and now she's facing a challenger who's only 29 years old, a socialist. A member of the DSA is challenging her. So this socialist, he's only 29 years old. He hasn't even been alive as long as she's been a congresswoman. It's like that saying, I've eaten more salt than you've eaten rice. So he's actually challenging her. And now, will the story from New York repeat itself? For example, the DSA is openly calling on people to vote for the socialist candidate, saying, let's win another victory. This has two implications. First, the socialist trend that started in New York hasn't stopped. It's spreading to the Western United States. Second, they can openly shout their support for socialism without facing any consequences. This is a huge and very worrying change in the United States right now. You have to understand, 20 years ago, you couldn't say something like that. If you did, you'd ruin your own election chances. Today, they can confidently and openly declare their support for socialists. That's the change happening in America. Also, there was a primary a few days ago that I haven't talked to you about yet. It was because Trump tweeted that I went back to check and found that the Washington, D.C. local primary was held on the 16th of this month, just about half a month ago. The result was that another DSA, that is Democratic Socialists of America, incumbent city council member named Janice Lewis George won the primary. Since Washington, D.C. is a city where over 90% of people support the Democratic Party, she is basically guaranteed to be elected mayor. So she will succeed the current mayor, who is not seeking re-election. The centrist Democratic mayor is named Bowser. So on Monday, Trump spoke to the media in the Oval Office at the White House, criticizing the rising movement of democratic socialism and labeling it as the greatest threat America has faced since its founding. President Trump once again warned that this political trend is essentially communism and is spreading rapidly across the country. Trump said that so-called democratic socialism is just a rebranded term. They use this term because it sounds nice, but in reality, it's just communism. This is the Communist Party. President Trump said, "I believe this is the greatest threat our country faces, perhaps the greatest threat since our founding, including World War I, World War II, 9/11, and the attack on Pearl Harbor." Trump said that maybe some people will laugh at what he said, but smart people will understand his point. President Trump said that the reason candidates who promote democratic socialism are able to gain followers and win voters is because they make promises they can't possibly keep. But it's just too easy to get elected by giving everything away. All right, so regarding this new market in D.C., what does the mayor want to do? He wants to empty the jails and turn D.C. into a sanctuary city. He opposes immigration and customs enforcement, welcomes illegal immigrants with criminal records back to the capital to live, resists and undermines efforts to fight crime, advocates for cutting police funding, and wants to expand what's called cashless bail. What is this policy called cashless bail? Well, no cash bail means you don't have to pay money to get out on bail. So what do you call bail if you don't have to pay? That's basically releasing people without any responsibility, right? So Trump made a statement. He tweeted saying that he had already fixed DC. He said he would absolutely not allow these kinds of policies. These city government policies are ruining the safety and order of the Capitol. So he also said that, just like he dealt with New York Mayor Adams, he wants to meet with the DC mayor, meaning he wants to have a showdown with her. All right, that's one trend in the United States. The second trend is about the investigation, this so-called Xinhanmu. Yesterday, I talked to everyone about this Xinhanmu, the American businessman hiding in Shanghai whose name is Xinhanmu. Some viewers pointed out you sometimes call him Xingyimu, sometimes Xinhanmu. So what exactly is his name? It seems like it's Xinhanmu. You have to look at the English spelling here. It's spelled Singham. So how do you pronounce that? It sounds like Xinhanmu, right? So let's settle on Xinhanmu. He's a former Treasury Department official. Hold on a second. It's Lehman. Sorry, Lehman. He recently served as the Director of Policy Research at the Bitcoin Policy Institute. Yesterday, he released a new report specifically examining Xinhanmu's network in the United States. There's also something else he's doing that nobody else knows about right now. What we do know is that he's been supporting all kinds of socialist groups in the United States. You know, the socialist groups he supports are not the same as the DSA. They really aren't the same thing. What he supports are the forces that the Chinese Communist Party wants to cultivate in the United States. So, as everyone knows, socialism or communism actually has two branches. One is violent communism, from the Soviet Union to China to North Korea to Cuba to Vietnam and so on. The other branch developed in Europe itself, starting from the Fabian Society in the UK, then to the Frankfurt School in Germany, then to Columbia University in the United States, and from there spreading to various American universities, Harvard, Yale, and so on, branching out and evolving into what we see today. This kind of situation is called gradualist communism. They advanced on two fronts. Now, Xinhanmu represents the hand of Chinese communism reaching into the United States. So not only in China, but also across the United States, various organizations have formed these so-called far-left movements that echo the Chinese Communist Party. So something just happened with him. A recent revelation is that he has been organizing people all over the country to oppose and block the construction of America's artificial intelligence infrastructure and the development of data centers. So in 14 states across the country, they organized 21 campaigns to oppose the development of artificial intelligence infrastructure locally. Okay, so this was part of a movement where the Party for Socialism and Liberation in the US acted as the key organizer. They tried to block nearly $24 billion in investments in artificial intelligence and data centers, and these investments were indeed delayed, reduced, or even completely stopped. What they leveraged was a lot of local residents' concerns about water usage, electricity consumption, and land use. They amplified these concerns. Activists used a set of narratives to coordinate and organize demonstrations, encouraging the public to stand up and block the construction of these data centers. The report says that opposition to data centers in the United States is real. And it's also locally driven. Behind it are these organizations, some organized groups allied with foreign entities, that have been working hard to amplify these concerns and turn what they call genuine dissatisfaction into action, thereby reducing the construction of data centers in the United States. The report gives an example of this. In Charlotte, North Carolina, a group called the Party for Socialism and Liberation went door to door in the city, canvassing, circulating petitions, and organizing protests. As a result, the city council, responding to public backlash, unanimously passed a 150-day moratorium on data center construction, the so-called stop work order. Now, they're working hard to turn this temporary moratorium into a permanent ban. So what's the background here? It's the competition between the Chinese Communist Party and the United States over artificial intelligence. Besides the competition in science and technology, the CCP is also doing other things, like siphoning off America's AI systems, which is basically copying someone else's homework. But at the same time, they're using America to go against America. That's the CCP's way of doing things. So this allows people like Xin Hanmu to use their networks across the United States to stir up public dissatisfaction. Wherever the US wants to build a data center, he goes there to stop it. In the end, this prevents the centers from being built, because data centers have to be located somewhere, right? Unless one day we move them into space and Musk's dream comes true. Otherwise, you always have to deal with the attitudes of local residents. He uses this kind of agitation to block the projects, and it's actually quite effective. He's already managed to stop more than 20 cases this way. There's no way to move forward, and some projects have been completely terminated.